Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This is episode 4 of Flex Your Vote, where we will be breaking down Proposition 29 on the 2022 California ballot. For those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. It is wonderful to have you, and thank you for joining us here on Flex Your Vote. If you have not already done so, I would encourage you to check out episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then come back here and join us. In episode 1, I overview the video series and give you a little bit of context in terms of how a measure makes it onto the California ballot. In episode 2, we dive into Propositions 26 and 27. And in episode 3, we just dropped yesterday, we dive into Proposition 28. But before we get started today, I would like to wish everyone a very happy Diwali. Diwali is a very auspicious festival in the Hindu calendar. It is meant to symbolize the triumph of good over evil, not only externally, but also with our internal choices. Diwali symbolizes a point in time in which we should kind of let go of all the negativity, all of the obstacles, the internal struggles that we have been holding on to in favor of moving forward with hope and focus and really positive energy for what awaits us on the other side. So even if you don't practice Diwali, I encourage you to apply the general takeaway of this auspicious celebration. And for those of you that do, happy Deepavali to you and your family. And thank you for joining us here on Flex Your Vote. Now, Proposition 29, moving back to the focus of this video, Proposition 29 is probably one of the most confusing propositions. And I have to blame the video marketing that has been introduced on this proposition because it tends to skew the actual effect if Proposition 29 were to be passed by California voters. So important to recognize that the marketing video can kind of obfuscate the actual effect and impact of this proposition, but it tends to be a pretty contentious proposition, and this is actually the third time that a proposition hoping to impact, to regulate the protocols at dialysis centers has been placed on the California ballots and up to the California constituency to vote on. So we will be breaking down this proposition today, and hope you're ready for more. Let's jump into episode 4. Now, before we dive into Proposition 29, let us take a step back. It's very important to understand first what dialysis is, and second, the current status quo at dialysis centers. Beginning first with dialysis, the kidney is responsible in our bodies for cleaning our blood, for eliminating the waste that we produce, and replenishing our body with clean sanitary blood while excreting waste that, if it were to build up in our bodies, could be very detrimental and lead to sepsis. So as a kidney begins to fail and is unable to perform this cleaning function, an individual will reach what is known as end-stage kidney failure. When a patient reaches this point, they essentially have one of two treatment avenues. The first is to receive routine chronic dialysis treatment or to receive a kidney transplant, and it must be one or the other. Most kidney patients who are at end-stage kidney failure will unfortunately not receive a kidney transplant. And so dialysis treatment essentially becomes a way of life. It is the only way to keep the body free from sepsis and to sustain your livelihood. Now, dialysis is a treatment that essentially mimics the functionality of a kidney. It removes dirty, unsanitary blood from the body, it filters it externally, and it reintroduces cleaned blood back into the body. And this process, it takes about 3 to 4 hours and is one that must be repeated at least 3 times a week. It is not a pleasant treatment. It is taxing, it is grueling, and it exposes patients, by nature of this treatment, to various medical complications and a high risk of infection that could lead to hospitalization. So a sanitary dialysis center is critical. A knowledge of infection rates at dialysis centers is also very important. And ensuring quality of care at dialysis centers can help prevent unnecessary complications and hospitalizations for patients who are already quite fragile and already quite ill. Now, the status quo at dialysis centers is that currently there are over 650 dialysis clinics in California, and about 80,000, a little over 80,000 Californians must receive dialysis care. And while there are various dialysis centers throughout California, there are 2 companies that consume the market. DaVita and Fresenius together account for about 70% of the market share of dialysis clinics in California. And in 2021, they reported a combined profit of $415 million. So these companies are doing quite well for themselves, unfortunately at the expense of dialysis patients. And at every single clinic, it is a patient care technician, a PCT, who completes the care and oversees the care while dialysis patients are receiving their dialysis treatment. And every clinic must be staffed with a dialysis nurse who oversees patient safety and oversees the functioning and the cleanliness as treatment is underway. That is typically the only requirement of clinic centers currently. And so this provides a useful context for what Proposition 29 is attempting to introduce. It's attempting to improve patient safety. It is attempting to improve transparency between clinics and communities by requiring the reporting of infection rates. And it's also ensuring that the patients are the ones protected. But this introduces a very useful question. Is it the role of California voters to dictate how dialysis centers are to move forward? And this is actually the 3rd time that California voters are being faced with this question. The union, Service Employees International Union, has previously introduced 2 pieces of legislation, both of which were voted against by a majority of California voters. And those prior propositions intended to have similar effects as compared to Proposition 29, and regulate dialysis care, improve patient safety, improve transparency. Important to note that Proposition 29 does have some key distinctions from those previously introduced propositions, but it has again been introduced by Service Employees International Union. So useful to understand the framework of this proposition, but critical to keep in mind that there are distinctions if you recall the prior propositions that were introduced. Okay, so what would Proposition 29 entail? Well, if enacted, there would be 4 primary effects. First, Proposition 29 would require every single dialysis clinic in California to have either a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant on site during all treatment hours at the clinic. Now, the clinic would have discretion on which of the type of clinician they would want available and present at their clinic while patients are receiving treatment. Of course, the clinic would be responsible for funding this clinician and hiring them. And the only requirement is that the clinician to be hired at each clinic must be one who has at least 6 months of direct experience providing care to a kidney patient. Now, there is an exception opportunity if a clinic is able to demonstrate to the California Department of Public Health that the vicinity of the clinic has a very low proportion of physicians, nurse practitioners, or physician assistants, and for that reason, they're unable to hire one to be physically present on site at their clinic. Then the California Department of Public Health would provide a 1-year exemption and allow this requirement under Proposition 29 to be fulfilled through telemedicine. So for 1 year, clinics with this exemption would be permitted to have a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant available during all treatment hours remotely. And they would simply be available through a telemedicine device or a telemedicine portal, but nonetheless available during all hours that treatment is being provided to dialysis patients at the clinic. The second effect of Proposition 29 is that all clinics must report infection rates to the California Department of Public Health. Now, we talked about why this is important and why this has been included in the language of Proposition 29, and that is because dialysis patients are vulnerable to infection and vulnerable to complications. So this language would require every single clinic to make their infection rates available to the California Department of Public Health. They must report these numbers every 3 months. And then the California Department of Public Health would be in charge of tracking these infection rates and making them available on the California Department of Public Health website for providers, for new patients, for existing patients, to be able to track and monitor the infection rates of every single clinic in California. So let's talk money and let's talk arguments for and against. To date, opponents of Proposition 29 have invested a total of $86.4 million into this race. Supporters, however, have not invested any money into the race thus far. They do, however, point to several arguments that weigh in favor of Proposition 29, including an increase in oversight and regulation of the booming and profitable dialysis business, an increase in transparency by requiring clinics to publish both infection rates and ownership information, that the requirement of an additional clinician is going to improve the status quo requirements and improve patient safety, and hopefully also decrease the risk of hospitalization, as having an on-site clinician may be able to prevent any escalating medical risk or medical condition before any need for hospitalization presents. And also by requiring clinics to obtain consent or notify the California Department of Public Health prior to reducing their service offerings or closing a clinic, patients will undoubtedly have a more continued care trajectory and will be able to easily access their dialysis care. Opponents, largely led by DaVita and Fresenius, assert that this proposition is merely a third attempt by a union to organize dialysis workers. And because of the increased cost to clinics, by hiring this additional clinician, by reporting additional metrics, these additional costs would lead undoubtedly to a clinic shutdown and mass clinic shutdown throughout the state. and they fear that this would decrease patient care, decrease patient access, and ultimately harm the individuals that are meant to be served by this proposition. So that is an overview of Proposition 29. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, please drop them down below. I encourage you to conduct additional research as you continue on this journey with me. And thank you so much for being here. Please stay tuned for more videos covering the remaining measures on our 2022 California ballot. And with that, I will see you in the next video.